My wife cancelled my flight to my mom's funeral to teach me priorities, so I cancelled everything of hers. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. His mother's name was Dorothy Mae Thompson, and she had been the kind of woman who pressed her church clothes the night before because morning always arrived with more demands than she expected, and she didn't want to meet Sunday underprepared. Marcus Thompson had known this about his mother since he was 7 years old, watching her set up the ironing board in the kitchen of the East Point apartment while the evening news played in the next room, and the smell of whatever was simmering on the stove mixed with the specific, warm, chemical scent of the iron's steam. He'd learned it the way children learn the true things about the people they love, not from a single moment but from the accumulated, patient observation of 1,000 small ones, the ordinary rituals that revealed who a person was more honestly than anything they said about themselves. Dorothy Mae Thompson had been the kind of woman who pressed her church clothes the night before. She had died on a Tuesday. Marcus had gotten the call from his sister Renee at 6:40 in the morning, the way terrible calls arrived, at the hours when the body wasn't fully awake and the defenses weren't in place, and the news landed on the unprotected interior of a person who was still half in the gentleness of sleep. He'd been in the kitchen making coffee. He'd sat down on the kitchen floor because his legs had made the decision before his mind had caught up to it, and he'd sat there for 7 minutes with his back against the cabinet and the phone against his chest and the coffee maker doing its work with the oblivious, continued efficiency of things that didn't know what had happened. His mother was gone. He'd booked the flight at 7:15, while sitting on the kitchen floor. Atlanta to Birmingham, where Dorothy Mae had lived for the last 12 years of her life in the house she'd shared with her sister Louise. The flight was at 2:30. He'd paid for it with the credit card in his name alone, the one whose number he'd committed to memory years ago for exactly the kind of situation where a number needed to be known immediately without the delay of getting up to find the wallet. He'd gone upstairs to pack. Elena had been awake when he came into the bedroom. He didn't know if she'd been awakened by the call or if she'd been awake before it, but she was sitting up in bed with the lamp on and her phone in her hand, with the specific quality of someone waiting rather than someone who has just woken. My mother passed, Marcus said. He said it the way he said most things that were true and terrible, directly, without preamble, because the preamble would have required a version of himself he didn't have access to at 7:18 in the morning after the call from Renee. Elena looked at him. My mother died this morning, he said. I booked a flight. I'm going to Birmingham. When does the flight leave? Elena said. 2:30, he said. I need to pack. He opened the closet. Behind him, he heard Elena pick up her phone. He didn't think about what she was doing with it. He packed. The airport was the airport at 1:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. The organized, ambient chaos of a mid-sized hub doing its midday business. The specific crowd composition of Tuesday travelers who were there for various compelling reasons and were managing their various compelling reasons with the focused, purposeful efficiency of people who had somewhere to be. Marcus had somewhere to be. He'd checked in through the app. He'd moved through security with the contained, careful attention of someone holding something fragile in their chest and navigating obstacles that might require the kind of quick movement that would disturb the careful holding. He'd reached his gate at 1:45, which was 45 minutes before departure, which was enough time to sit and to breathe and to call Renee and tell her he was at the airport and would be there by 4:30. Renee had said, "We'll hold dinner. We'll wait for you." He'd said, "Don't wait. Eat." She'd said, "We'll wait." He'd been sitting at the gate for 12 minutes when he opened the airline app to check the status of his boarding pass. The status was, "Reservation not found." He looked at the screen. He checked it again. Not found. He went to the desk. The gate agent, a young woman with the patient, professional manner of someone trained to manage the specific emotional states that airport desks encountered, looked at his name in her system. "Sir, the reservation on this name was cancelled at 9:14 this morning," she said. "It was cancelled by the cardholder." Marcus looked at her. "The card used for the original booking," she said, gently. "The cancellation was processed through the airline's customer service line. The credit card he'd used was in his name alone. But it was connected to their joint account. Elena had the account number." He sat back down at the gate. He sat in the plastic chair at the gate where the 2:30 flight to Birmingham was about to board without him, and he felt the thing arrive, not the grief, which was already there, which had been there since the kitchen floor at 6:40, but the specific, compound thing that lived underneath the grief, and that was if anything, harder to hold than the grief, because the grief had a name and a face and a cause, and the thing underneath it did not have a name yet. He'd find the name for it later. For now, he called Renee. He told her what had happened. Renee was quiet for a moment that had the quality of someone deciding what to do with information that exceeded the available responses. Then she said, "Stay at the airport. I'm booking you another flight on my card." Renee, "Stay at the airport, Marcus." He stayed at the airport. He took the 4:50 flight on a ticket his sister had bought for him, and he arrived in Birmingham at 6:15, and he walked into his Aunt Louise's house where his mother's people were assembled in the specific, warm, grief-organized way of black Southern families gathering around a loss, the food that had materialized on every surface, the voices overlapping in the specific rhythm of people who loved each other and were communicating that love through the act of being present together, and his Aunt Louise held him for a long time and said nothing, which was the right thing. He stayed for 3 days. He did not call Elena. Elena called him 4 times. He looked at her name on the screen and declined each call with the specific, clear-eyed attention of a man who was doing the work of grief and had decided, with the particular clarity that grief sometimes produced, that Elena's calls were not something he had the capacity to receive right now. He was burying his mother. Everything else could wait. The marriage had been, for the 6 years of its existence, a study in the specific, sustained psychology of a controlling person who had learned to make the control feel like care until the moment when the care was no longer useful and the control no longer needed to disguise itself. Marcus had been 34 when he met Elena. He'd been at the point in his professional life where the significant foundation had been laid. The career in healthcare logistics consulting, the careful savings, the beginning of the investment structure that Vivian Hayes had been helping him build. And he'd been, in the honest accounting of a man who was trying to understand how he'd gotten from there to here, vulnerable to the specific appeal of someone who seemed, in the early months, to know exactly what she wanted and to want it with the confident, clear precision that he'd always found attractive. The confidence had been real. What the confidence had been the expression of was something else. He'd seen it first in the way she managed his calendar. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the gradual accumulation of small adjustments, the "I moved your thing to Thursday because we have the dinner Friday and you'll be tired" that was reasonable once and twice and became, after the 15th time, the established fact that his calendar was managed by Elena's assessment of his energy and availability rather than by his own. He'd seen it in the way she managed his money. Again, not dramatically, not in the sudden way of someone grabbing, but in the patient, incremental way of someone who understood that access accumulated if you built it slowly. The joint account she'd suggested in year 1 for household expenses. The credit card in both names for convenience. The habit, established gently and then reinforced until it was simply how things were, of Elena handling the financial logistics of the shared life in ways that placed her in the position of the one who knew where things were and how things worked and what the current state of the various arrangements was. He'd seen it in 100 specific small moments that he'd told himself, individually, were within the range of normal. The dinner she'd rearranged because she'd decided he'd been working too hard, the trip she'd cancelled because she'd decided the timing wasn't right, the friendship she'd gently redirected because she'd decided the friend wasn't good for him. He'd told himself each of these things was care. He'd been wrong. What they were was the patient, systematic construction of a life in which Elena was the authority on what Marcus needed and wanted and was capable of, and Marcus was the person whose life was being organized according to that authority. It was a small, domestic empire, maintained not through cruelty but through the constant, gentle pressure of someone who was always certain and whose certainty, over time, made the other person doubt their own. The thing at the airport, the 9:14 cancellation, processed through the airline's customer service line, on the morning Marcus's mother had died, was not the most dramatic thing Elena had done in 6 years of marriage. It was, however, the clearest. It was the one that arrived with sufficient clarity that no interpretation was possible. He'd been going to his mother's funeral. She had cancelled the flight. She had told him, in the specific language of action rather than words, that the going was something she had authority over, and that the authority was available to be exercised even on the morning that Dorothy Mae Thompson died. He had 3 days in Birmingham to sit with that. He used them well. Vivian Hayes picked up on the first ring. This was 6:47 on a Friday morning, which was the morning after Marcus had returned from Birmingham, and he was in his home office with the door closed, and he was looking at the wall with the specific, focused attention of a man who has decided something and is now in the process of deciding what to do with the deciding. "I need you," he said, when she answered. "I know," she said. Renee called me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He had not known that. He filed it. Renee had called Vivian, which was Renee being Renee, which was his sister understanding that Vivian was the person to call in situations like this one and calling her, which was another of the 1,000 small evidences of his sister's love that he would be adding to the list in the weeks and months that followed. Where do we start? Vivian said. She used the joint account information to cancel my flight, Marcus said. On the morning my mother died. While I was packing. I know, Vivian said. That's what Renee told me. I need to understand what I can do, Marcus said. Not to punish her. To protect myself. To establish that certain things are mine and not subject to her authority. To make sure that what happened on Tuesday can't happen again. He paused. And there are things that I've been financing that are hers. That I've been paying for. I want to understand what I can stop. Vivian was quiet for 3 seconds, which was the longest silence she produced when she was thinking seriously. You can close your half of the joint account, she said. Or redirect your deposits to an account in your name alone, which stops the access without requiring immediate confrontation. The credit card in both names. You can have yourself removed as primary cardholder and her as an authorized user simultaneously, which terminates her access. There are other things, depending on what's in your name. Tell me about the other things, Marcus said. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. When the call ended, Marcus had a list. The list was not a revenge plan. He was clear about this in his own honest accounting. This was not the theater of a man getting back at someone who had hurt him, because that kind of theater was not who he was and was not what the moment required. The moment required something more honest and more durable than theater. The moment required clarity. He was going to create clarity. He did not do it all at once. He did it over 3 days, each action taken in the specific sequence that Vivian had recommended, each action documented, each action within the clear legal and financial authority of a man who was doing what a person was permitted to do with the accounts and subscriptions and financial arrangements that were in his name or that he'd been funding. The first day, he separated the finances. He opened a personal checking account at a branch of First Meridian on his lunch break, transferred his direct deposit through his employer's portal, and called the joint accounts institution to have himself removed as the initiating party on outgoing transfers, which didn't close the account but which meant that the account's balance, from that day forward, reflected only Elena's deposits and expenditures rather than his. The specific, technical term for what this did was, it made the account accurately describe whose money was in it. The effect was, the joint account, from which Elena had historically drawn for the European spa retreat she had booked for the following March, the quarterly subscription to the interior design service she used for the house, and the premium membership to the fitness studio where she spent 4 mornings a week, was now funded by Elena alone. This was not cruelty. This was accuracy. The second day, he addressed the credit card. The credit card in both names. The one Elena had used for the flight cancellation, which she'd accessed through the account number she had, was, in legal terms, a joint card in which Marcus was the primary cardholder and Elena was an authorized user. Primary cardholders could terminate authorized user status. The call to the card's issuer took 11 minutes and produced a confirmation number that Vivian had told him to keep. He kept it. He also called the airline, which confirmed that the cancellation of his Tuesday flight had been made from a call to their customer service line using the card number, the reservation number, and the cardholder's last name. He requested a written record of the cancellation and the time it was processed. They sent it to his email. The third day, he addressed the subscriptions. This took the longest because there were more of them than he'd realized, which was its own kind of information. The specific, accumulated evidence of a life that had been organized around comfortable expenditure without full awareness of where the comfort was coming from. The European spa retreat had been booked through a travel concierge service that billed Marcus's card quarterly for the membership. The interior design service was a monthly subscription billed to his email. The fitness studio's premium membership was in his name at Elena's suggestion, which had been her consistent approach to valuable services. Suggest them and allow the logistics to resolve in a direction that placed them in his name, which meant they were accessible and, until now, beyond question. He cancelled the travel concierge membership. He cancelled the interior design service. He transferred the fitness studio membership to a new account with a different billing card, specifically, Elena's personal card, which was her responsibility to fund, and notified the studio of the change. He also looked at the house. The house was joint property. Purchased jointly, titled jointly, financed jointly. He was not doing anything with the house. But he did call the utilities company and the home security service and the streaming subscriptions that were billed to the household account that was now accurately funded, which meant that if Elena wished to continue those services at the current level, she would need to fund them from her own income. This was not complicated. This was just what happened when the money that had been paying for things was no longer in the account from which the things had been paying. Elena discovered the changes on the fourth day. She discovered them in the specific, sequential way that people discovered financial changes when they hadn't been warned. The fitness studio first, when her access card produced an error at the front desk and the staff member told her that the membership billing had been updated to a different card and could she provide the new card's information. She'd provided her personal card, which had processed, but the processing had produced the specific, focused attention of someone who has encountered a signal and is beginning to read it. She'd come home and checked the joint account. She'd called the travel concierge. She'd looked at the interior design service. She'd called Marcus. He answered. "What did you do?" she said. She was in the even, controlled voice that she used when she was managing a significant emotion. The voice that wanted to present as calm and was working harder than usual at it. "I separated the finances," he said. "The things that were in my name or billed to my accounts have been redirected to arrangements that reflect who's actually using them. You cancelled my." "I didn't cancel anything that's yours," he said. "I cancelled subscriptions that were in my name and billed to my accounts. If you want those services, they're available to you. You'll need to subscribe in your own name." Marcus, the concierge service had my March trip, which was a trip I had no prior knowledge of that was being planned using a service I was paying for, he said, in the same even, informational register. She was quiet. "I want to say something to you," Marcus said. "And I want to say it clearly and completely, because I think you deserve to understand what happened." "I know what happened," she said. "You're punishing me." "I'm not punishing you," he said. "Punishment is what you do when someone has wronged you and you want them to suffer for it. I don't want you to suffer. I want you to have accurate information about the consequences of choices." "What consequences?" she said. "On Tuesday morning," Marcus said, "at 6:40 a.m., my sister called me to tell me that our mother had died. I sat on the kitchen floor. I called the airline and booked a flight. I came upstairs and told you what had happened and that I was going to Birmingham. And while I was packing, you called the airline's customer service line and used the joint account information to cancel my reservation." Elena said nothing. "You have never explained that to me," Marcus said. "You've called 4 times since Tuesday and I haven't answered, because I was burying my mother and I didn't have the capacity to have this conversation while doing that. I have the capacity now." He paused. "I want to know why you cancelled the flight." Silence. "Elena, you've been neglecting things here," she said, finally. The specific, careful diction of someone who had rehearsed a justification but found the rehearsal insufficient for the actual moment. "You promised we'd handle the kitchen renovation planning this week and you'd been deprioritizing. You cancelled my flight to my mother's funeral," Marcus said, "because of kitchen renovation planning." The sentence sat in the space between them. "That's not," she started. "Is that what you told yourself?" He said. "When you called the airline at 9:14 on the morning my mother died. That you were teaching me to prioritize the kitchen renovation." She said nothing. "Elena," he said, "I need to say something to you that I want you to hear as honestly as I mean it. I have been in this marriage for 6 years. I have watched you manage my life with the confident authority of someone who understood what was good for me better than I did. The calendar, the finances, the friendships, the decisions. I told myself it was care. I think some of it was care. I think some of it was something else that was using the language of care." He paused. "The flight cancellation is the version of the something else that I can't explain away. There is no version of caring for a person that includes canceling their flight to their mother's funeral." Silence. "I'm filing for divorce," he said. "Vivian Hayes is handling everything. Please get an attorney." "Marcus, get a good one," he said. "You'll want good representation. The financial picture is going to be clearer than you expect, and you deserve accurate information and competent counsel." He ended the call. He sat in his home office for a while after that. He thought about Dorothy Mae Thompson pressing her church clothes the night before, the ironing board in the kitchen, the sound of the news from the next room. He thought about Renee's voice on the phone at 6:40, and the kitchen floor, and the coffee maker doing its work with the oblivious, continued efficiency of things that didn't know what had happened. He thought about Aunt Louise holding him for a long time and saying nothing. He cried. He let himself cry, which was what the grief required, and which the grief had been patient enough about, waiting while he dealt with the airport and the flight and the 3 days in Birmingham and the return and the financial arrangements and the phone call, all of it, and then arriving now with the full, undeniable presence of a thing that had been waiting for the correct moment and had found it. He cried for his mother. He cried for what he'd thought he had in a marriage and what he'd actually had. He cried for the 6 years of small moments that had each individually seemed within the range of normal and that collectively had built a structure that he'd been living in without fully seeing its shape. He cried, and then he was done crying, and he washed his face, and he called Renee. The divorce proceedings were handled by Vivian with the thoroughness and precision that made her invaluable. The financial disclosures, the asset documentation, the careful, equitable navigation of a situation that was complicated not by malice but by the 6-year accumulation of financial arrangements that had been organized in ways that obscured who owned what. Vivian uncomplicated it. The process moved. Elena retained an attorney, a woman named Patterson who came professionally recommended and who had the specific, careful realism of someone who had reviewed the full picture of the case and communicated its contours to her client with accuracy. The proceedings were not pleasant, but they were fair, which was the standard Marcus had set and which Vivian had maintained throughout. The house was sold and the proceeds divided accurately. The financial arrangements were resolved in the way that 6 years of intertwined finances resolved when 2 competent attorneys brought careful attention to the disentanglement. It took 7 months. At the end of the 7 months, Marcus Thompson was in the apartment he'd leased in January. East-facing windows, proper kitchen, a framed photograph of Dorothy May on the bookshelf that he'd taken the night before her funeral from the collection Aunt Louise had assembled for the service, a photograph of his mother at her sister's wedding in 1982, in a dress that she had pressed the night before, laughing at something outside the frame. He looked at the photograph every morning when he made his coffee. He was working on learning to find it comfort rather than pain, which was the long, patient work of grief, and which was going well by increments too small to measure but real enough to register. The Dorothy May Thompson Foundation incorporated in April, 1 year after her death, with a mission that Marcus had been building towards since the night in Birmingham when he'd sat with his aunts and his sister and the women of his mother's church and understood with the specific, embodied clarity of a room full of people who had actually been Dorothy May Thompson's people, who had known her in the ordinary, daily, unhurried way of real community, that the thing worth honoring was not the dramatic version of her but the quiet, pressing clothes the night before version. The Foundation's mission was practical and specific. Support and resources for adult children navigating the loss of a parent while managing controlling or unsupportive relationships. Grief counseling services for men whose access to grief had been complicated by the dynamics of their partnerships, and a legal resource program for people in the specific situation of needing to protect themselves during a period when grief should have been the only thing demanding their attention. The thing that had complicated Marcus's grief was the airport. The foundation was built to make sure that when grief arrived for people in controlling relationships, they had somewhere to go that understood both things simultaneously. He taught the first community session himself, on a Saturday morning in May, to 22 people, not all men, not all grieving a parent, but all carrying the specific, compound weight of grief that had been made more difficult by the person who was supposed to make hard things easier. He told them his mother's name. He told them she had pressed her church clothes the night before, because morning always arrived with more demands than she expected and she didn't want to meet Sunday underprepared. He told them what had happened on the Tuesday morning she died. He told them the story completely and honestly. The kitchen floor, the coffee maker, the flight booked at 7:15, the packed bag, the airport gate, the reservation not found, the call from Renee, the flight his sister bought. He told them about the 3 days in Birmingham and what the room full of his mother's people had felt like and what Aunt Louise had done when she held him at the door. He told them, grief is its own country, with its own rules, and one of the most important rules is that it is not subject to someone else's calendar or priorities or assessment of what your relationship with the person you've lost was worth to you. Your grief belongs to you. The access to it belongs to you. No one who loves you would stand between you and the chance to say goodbye to your mother. He told them, the practical tools matter. Know your accounts. Know what's in your name. Know who has access to what and what can be done if that access is used against you. Protect yourself in the practical ways, because protecting yourself in the practical ways is not cold or unromantic. It is the specific, adult acknowledgement that love is not the only force operating in relationships and that the other forces deserve to be understood and planned for. He told them, call your Vivian Hayes. Have the number before you need it. Know who you'll call when the thing happens that requires someone who knows what to do. He told them, the cancellation of those subscriptions was not revenge. It was the specific, quiet act of a man making the financial arrangements of his life accurately reflect his own understanding of his priorities, which was something he should have done years earlier and which he did when the clarity arrived that made the doing possible. He told them, grief has its own schedule and you can't push it or pull it or control it, but you can protect the space where it lives. Protect the space. Don't let anyone shrink it or redirect it or manage it on their behalf. He told them, my mother would have understood all of this. She pressed her clothes the night before because the morning had more demands than anyone expected. She had taught him to prepare. He was prepared. 22 people in a community room received this with the complete, personal attention of people who had come because they needed to hear something and were finding, in what they were hearing, the specific kind of understanding that only arrived when someone who had been through the thing was describing the thing rather than theorizing about it. On a Thursday morning in October, 14 months after Dorothy Mae Thompson had died on a Tuesday, Marcus Thompson made his coffee in the kitchen of his apartment and carried it to the east-facing window and looked at Atlanta doing its October morning business, the clear, pale, honest light of a Georgia fall, the city going about its life with the indifferent, continuous vitality of a place that didn't know what had happened to anyone in it and would be there regardless. He looked at the photograph on the bookshelf. His mother at his aunt's wedding in 1982. The dress pressed the night before. The laugh at something outside the frame. He thought about the morning she'd died. He thought about the kitchen floor and the coffee maker and the flight that had been cancelled and the flight his sister had bought and the 3 days in Birmingham and Aunt Louise's arms and the room full of his mother's people and every subsequent thing, in sequence, as it had arrived, the return, the phone call with Vivian, the 3 days of careful, legal, documented action, the confrontation, the filing, the 7 months, the apartment, the foundation, this morning. He was not finished grieving. He understood this. Grief was not a project with a completion date. It was a country you learned to live in and then learned to visit and then found, gradually, that the distance from it was increasingly livable and that the photograph on the bookshelf was increasingly comfort rather than pain, without the comfort ever erasing the thing it was comforting. He was working on it. He was doing the work. He was also, today, going to his mother's church in Birmingham for the first time since the funeral, going for the fall women's ministry luncheon that Aunt Louise had told him Dorothy Mae had organized for the past 12 years, and that the church was continuing in her memory, and that Aunt Louise thought Marcus should attend because his mother had poured herself into it and because his presence would mean something to the women who had known her. He was going because it would mean something to the women who had known her. He was going because his mother had pressed her clothes the night before and had taught him by doing it that the things worth doing were worth showing up for properly. He'd pressed his clothes last night. He finished his coffee. He picked up his keys. He was going to be exactly on time. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If it moved you, like, share, and comment on the lessons you took from it. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next video.